John Cena is without a doubt the biggest star that the WWE has created in the last 20 years. Love him or hate him, you can't deny the facts that without Cena on the WWE roster, who knows where the business would be at this point. In recent years, Cena's wrestling career has taken a backseat to Hollywood aspirations, but in this video, we'll take you all the way back and perhaps look forward a bit, as there may be so much of the story to be told in the future. For now, let's dive into the wrestling career of the one and only John Cena. John Cena was legit born in West Newbury, Massachusetts on April 23, 1977. Cena was part of a family that included 5 boys, as which he was the second oldest. Cena went to a Catholic school growing up and played football for Springfield College while receiving a degree in exercise physiology. When Cena would come home from college in the summer, he would be weight training and bodybuilding and performing in competitions. Those summers would craft Cena's physique, and after college was over, Cena, as a lifelong wrestling fan, would be in just the right place at the right time, being an acquaintance of Mike Bell, who referred him to UPW Wrestling School out in California. During his time in UPW, the promotion was actually featured on a TV special for the Discovery Channel, which is where many, including myself, first got a look at Cena as a young tryout with the promotion. His character was named the Prototype, and seemingly out of the gate, Cena could cut a fierce promo. I remember my brother and I watching the show years ago, and we both agreed that this guy had a lot of potential with his look and how well he talked. WWE brass, I'm sure, saw the same things we did, and after Cena wrestled a couple dark matches and tryouts at WWE, he was hired and then sent to the current developmental territory at that time, Ohio Valley Wrestling. Cena's cohorts at OVW included a who's who of future WWE stars, including Randy Orton and Brock Lesnar. Cena would spend most of 2001 and into 2002 as part of OVW and would hold the tag team titles there, but he wasn't really thought of as a future superstar, it seems. Cena, believe it or not, just kind of became a guy, and even though he obviously looked good, it was very different from today's product, where you can clearly see on NXT who is being groomed for bigger things. I don't think that necessarily was the case here, but then on June 27th, 2002, Cena officially made his WWE debut, as Vince McMahon had just dropped his ruthless aggression edict to WWE superstars alike, and part of that movement was the debut of Cena. Cena answered an open challenge made by Kurt Angle, and even though Cena lost the match, Cena was given a fair amount of shine in the match and put in a decent showing, but since he lost, it wasn't your typical underdog overcoming the odds story. And Cena stuck around on the main roster, but his appearances were very limited and forgettable, which included his run in the fall of 2002, when Cena began teaming with Billy Kidman for a short time, and then he turned heel on Kidman. Then on the Halloween edition of SmackDown in 2002, it would seem that fate stepped in, and during a backstage vignette, Cena was in costume as 90s rapper Vanilla Ice, and proceeded to bust a freestyle rap at Stephanie McMahon, which is something that they had actually worked out days prior, apparently. The bars impressed somebody, and Cena was given a rapper gimmick the very next week. This would begin John Cena's skyrocketing to the top of the wrestling business. Cena's 2003 would be the year that would end up solidifying everything, as Cena was given a set of matches with Brock Lesnar, who was WWE champion at the time. Then he was put into a program with The Undertaker. This was ultimately Cena's trial by fire, and you have to assume that his performance in these programs helped solidify his growing position in the WWE. Also, it's worth mentioning that Cena was given a bodyguard type enforcer during this run, with the formerly known Bull Buchanan working as B Squared. As the year of 2003 came to a close, Cena was being teased for the main event picture, but would be pulled back into the mid-card while Chris Benoit was anointed the push going into WrestleMania 20 in 2004. And Cena had turned babyface at Survivor Series 2003 by joining Kurt Angle's team. This was more out of necessity, as Cena was getting great crowd responses, mainly due to the fact that Cena could legit rap pretty good and would always find a creative way to diss his opponent. Even though Cena was pulled from the title picture, he was quickly set up into the US title program and would end up facing the Big Show at WrestleMania 20, where Cena captured his first piece of WWE gold. Cena defended the championship through 2004, during which he lost the belt and regained it. Then, after losing it for a second time, Cena went to go film the Oscar-winning movie The Marine. I'm kidding, of course, but all jokes aside, Cena began to be cast in WWE Studios movies at this time, and a role that would play a key part in rising his star profile, as well as help create the resume that would set up his actual Hollywood career years later. As 2005 started, it was clear that Cena was perhaps the golden goose and was booked as one of the final two participants in the Royal Rumble match that year. This was the famous clip where Vince McMahon blew both of his quads while restarting the match after Cena and Batista were eliminated simultaneously. And the match was eventually won by Batista, although it didn't matter. Both men would be positioned to win the two world championships at WrestleMania 21 in March of 2005. And Cena would immediately put his own spin on the title by incorporating a spinning plate onto the belt, which he had also done with the US Championship. And by June of 2005, Cena was drafted to the flagship Raw brand and was positioned as the company's top star. Cena then began a feud with Chris Jericho, which lasted for months, and it was during this run that fans started to bite back a little bit when it came to Cena. With Jericho being beloved by many hardcore fans, the feud created a rift within the fan base, as many of the hardcore Jericho fans were perhaps annoyed that a relative newcomer like Cena was getting the rocket attached to his back, perhaps just a little bit before the fans were ready for it. It's these crowd reactions that would set the stage for Cena's entire run, and even to this day, there is still a very vocal part of the fan base that will always remember this and always treat Cena as such. From there, crowd reactions be darned. The only thing that matters to Vince McMahon is money and business, and Cena moved the needle inherently. Cena's 2006 was an interesting one, as he was clearly this big star, but the pushback from the audience continued. Cena was paired with Triple H for WrestleMania 22, which should have been another crowning moment for Cena, but the match fell a little flat in my opinion due to Cena and Triple H both being characters that fans have pushed back on in recent years at that time. After WrestleMania, Cena went into ECW One Night Stand 2 pay-per-view, which is a story for a whole other video, but is significant here because Cena drops the title to Rob Van Dam, who would lose weeks later to Edge, and this would lead to more of the Cena and Edge feud through the rest of 2006. This era of wrestling into today's product is hard to pin down on a program-by-program basis. That is except for the major ones, of course, and Cena would spend 2006 also having matches with The Big Show and Booker T, and also closed out the year by having an interesting feud with Kevin Federline, who was famous at the time for being married to pop star Britney Spears. And in early 2007, Cena formed a short-lived dream team with Shawn Michaels That led to Shawn turning on Cena to set up a match at WrestleMania 23, where Cena retained the championship yet again. And Cena spent the summer of 2007 working with the Great Khali and Randy Orton. And in October of 2007, Cena ended up tearing a pectoral muscle while in a match with Mr. Kennedy, who conveniently enough ended up out of the WWE a short while later. But Cena would return a scant 3 months later at January 2008's Royal Rumble, where he entered as the number 30 to a shocked crowd and was quite literally the biggest pop of John Cena's career, arguably. Cena ended up in a triple threat match at WrestleMania 24 with Randy Orton and Triple H, and Cena would actually lose this time around in a match that was super forgettable. Forgettable is a good word to describe Cena's 2008, as he was pushed down to the upper mid-card and feuded with JBL during that summer. And Cena and Batista won the tag team titles during this time as well, only to drop them a week later. And this would set up a match at SummerSlam with Batista, where Cena ended up with a herniated disc and would be out of action for the second time within a calendar year. And Cena would return at Survivor Series in November of 2008 to win the World Heavyweight Championship from Chris Jericho. Cena would carry the title until Elimination Chamber in February of 2009, when Cena would lose to Edge and then regain the title a month later at WrestleMania 25. Edge would defeat Cena then a month later once again, and then Cena would move down the card again to work with the Big Show. Cena would return to the title picture at Night of Champions that year and begin working with Orton yet again to lead to a singles match with them at SummerSlam and the following pay-per-view Breaking Point, where Cena won an I Quit match and became the WWE Champion for a fourth time. Then Cena and Orton would play switch with the title for a couple more months, and Cena would lose the title in December of 2009 to Sheamus. Cena would regain the WWE Championship at Elimination Chamber in February of 2010. This would set up the bulk of his feud with Batista, who would win the belt from Cena leading up to their match at WrestleMania 26, where Cena would vanquish Batista 3 times in a row to close their feud. After that wrapped up, Cena was free of a program and had literally worked with everyone possible, it seemed, during this time. And Cena was then the center of the Nexus storyline, where the Young Rebel group took over Monday Night Raw. This led to a 7 vs. 7 tag match at SummerSlam 2010, where Daniel Bryan famously returned after being fired. Cena would spend the rest of 2010 into 2011 feuding with the Nexus and the couple different forms of the group. This would be where him and CM Punk would first cross paths, which would come up again in the summer of 2011. From there, Miz would start a feud with Cena that went into WrestleMania 27 and fell flat when he lost by DQ in the main event of the show. This feud was paralleled by the start of a program between The Rock and Cena, which would lead to their WrestleMania 28 match in April of 2012, which Cena would lose and set up their rematch for the next year. Cena also had a notable match with Brock Lesnar in April of 2012, which is notable to me. Cena would win the return match with The Rock at WrestleMania 29, capturing the WWE Championship yet again. Cena would then feud with Ryback, and Cena would end up tearing his Achilles. And Ryback, well, he's not with the company anymore, so stop me if you notice some sort of trend here. Cena would continue to work through SummerSlam, where he dropped the title to Daniel Bryan and would take time off for surgery on his triceps. He would then return just 2 months later at Hell in a Cell in October 2013 There, he would win the World Heavyweight Championship for the third and final time. Cena then lost a title unification match to Randy Orton, and after failing to regain the then undisputed championship, Cena was nestled into a program with Bray Wyatt and the Wyatt family. This would set up a big match at WrestleMania 30 between the two. Many fans saw this as a chance for the WWE to make Bray Wyatt, and while the rub with Cena seemed to help his star a little bit, Cena would not lose to Wyatt at WrestleMania 30. Therefore, many believe, including myself, that this stalled Bray Wyatt's push. Be that as it may, Cena would spend the rest of 2014 feuding with Seth Rollins and The Authority. And it was during this year that Cena would win his 15th World Championship. For whatever reason, though, as WrestleMania season came up that next year, Cena was out of the championship picture and instead would start a program with Rusev, who was the US champion at the time. Once again, Cena was set up to put over a young heel gaining steam, but that would not end up happening again, as at WrestleMania 31, Cena defeated Rusev. This would set up Cena doing a memorable run as US champion, where he would run an open challenge every week. After that concluded, Cena would then take a different direction in the company. Seemingly, Cena was being used as the test subject for newer stars coming into the company. As he did with Rollins, Cena would elevate Kevin Owens upon his arrival to the main roster. Cena would spend the rest of 2015 mainly working with Rollins while nursing a shoulder injury, which he would finally have surgery for and take time off in January of 2016. Cena then returned early at WrestleMania 32 by assisting The Rock to quote-unquote defeat the Wyatt family, and then he would return to full ring action by June of 2016. Cena would then start a program with AJ Styles, who debuted for the WWE in January earlier that year. Cena would trade the title back and forth with Styles into the beginning of 2017. It was also right around this time that Cena started looking more towards Hollywood projects, which included him hosting a TV series called American Grit, which was a reality-based competition show. On January 29, 2017, Cena would win his 16th World Championship by defeating AJ Styles, which WWE hyped up as tying Ric Flair's world title reign record. However, this is disputed by at least one major wrestling historian who claims that Flair's title reigns are actually somewhere in the 20s. At this time, John Cena was in a high-profile relationship with Nikki Bella, a fellow WWE superstar. Their relationship was chronicled throughout the E! television show Total Divas, and in the lead up to WrestleMania 33, Cena was put in a program once again with The Miz, and this time the feud would also involve Miz's real-life wife, Maryse. So to even the odds, of course, Bella was brought in to tag with Cena, and we had a mixed tag match for WrestleMania 33. After Cena and Bella defeated Miz and Maryse at WrestleMania, John Cena proposed to Nikki Bella, making a WrestleMania moment that was cutefully short-lived, as the couple would end up splitting not long after. And after WrestleMania 33, Cena took another break for a few months, then returned to work a couple of lame programs with Baron Corbin and Rusev. This would lead, however, to the first ever one-on-one match with him and Roman Reigns, which sadly only lasted one match. Many fans thought this was it for Cena, but he returned the next month for Survivor Series in November of 2017, and then in January of 2018, Cena began a storyline where he questioned himself going into WrestleMania, as he was puzzled as to what he wanted to do at the event. Cena would end up attending the event as a fan before running to the backstage area mid-show, and then proceeding to challenge The Undertaker. who also did not have a match on the card. This would end up in basically a short squash match for The Undertaker, as he took care of Cena in short order. From there and on into today, Cena's career would slow way down in the ring, as he has been brought in from time to time, but hasn't really started anything meaningful. In 2019 at Wrestlemania, Cena made a surprise appearance as his original Doctor of Thugonomics rap gimmick to beat up on Elias. And then in 2020, Cena was inserted into a pretty quick program with Bray Wyatt as The Fiend, which for many reasons ended up being not so much of a match, but more like a mini movie called the Firefly Funhouse match. And the match received mostly mixed negative reviews from fans. And Cena has been off WWE TV ever since then, but as of press time, he is slated to make his return sometime in July of 2021. So that's it, boys and girls. That's the career of John Cena. Let me know in the comments what your favorite John Cena match is of all time, and who do you think he should work with upon returning. Thank you very much for watching. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you are new here, and we'll see you next time on Pro Wrestling Planet.